even though they're doing a great job, what happens is that the inner thoughts, the inner dialogue is like a self-critic that is telling you you're not doing your best. You're a fraud.
I am Lucia Gallegos, and this is Flowers in Winter.
Hello! Again, my name is Lucia Gallegos, and I'm a registered psychotherapist here in Ontario, and this is Flowers in Winter. Welcome again to this podcast where I talk about women and mental health. And today's topic, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. I've talked about this previously, but I see there's a lot of interest. So today, I'm going to be explaining how therapy can help us to deal with imposter syndrome. So just keep in mind that this podcast has the intention to provide information on mental health. However, it's not intended as a substitute of professional mental health. If you feel that you would like to discuss this topic further, always seek professional advice of your mental health professional. So let's dive in. And first thing first, what is imposter syndrome? I already explained with more detail in another podcast, another blog. So if you would like to add more information to it, please go and check my blog or go and listen to the other podcast. It's called Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. But I will give you some information here also. So imposter syndrome is when you experience feelings or thoughts that you're incompetent despite evidence to the contrary. What does that mean? You experience this self-doubt even though you have proof or you have done differently. And why does it happen? There are different causes. Some of them might be rooted during childhood, depending on the experience and the dynamics in the family, how we grew up. It's going to have an impact on us as an adults. So in the other episode, I was giving this example of woman during childhood that she was always achieving her best at school to get the good marks so she could be accepted at home. So whenever she got a B plus instead of A plus, at home probably the feedback was like, you're not doing the best. You have to excel more in order to be accepted in the family. So probably she grew up with that mindset, understanding that I'm not good enough, therefore no one is going to love me, therefore I have to be perfect. And perfectionism could be related to imposter syndrome, same as people pleasant, because those mechanisms, the ways that we protect ourselves during in a childhood, they have a huge impact when we are adults in our adult life. So what we can do about it, because imposter syndrome is something that we suffer. I see it in my practice when I'm talking to women, and most of the time they come to my office or they come to therapy because they find that they're not good enough at work and that they have to excel and that they're doing everything in their power to make it look perfect. However, there is suffering there. And that's the key point, because they're understanding somehow at an unconscious level that if they don't do these things correctly, they're not going to be accepted, they're going to be rejected, and that's painful. So even though they're doing a great job, what happens is that the inner thoughts, the dialogue, the inner dialogue is like a self-critic that is telling you you're not doing your best. You're a fraud, even though you are doing the contrary. And this is so difficult because you feel anxious, you feel stressed, you probably feel depressed, and you don't know the cause. I remember working with a woman, beautiful woman, and every time she comes to therapy, she was saying and telling me, Lucia, I have to do it better. And we're talking about this young woman that she's doing her best. She's waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she's going to bed pretty late at night. and she has been working for this company for a long time, doing her best, and coming to the office and saying, how can I do better? How can I perform better? So instead of focusing on how can you perform better, let's try to take a time to explore, like, what do you think you're not performing well enough? What do you fear the most? So here is why therapy is a great tool to help you to deal with imposter syndrome. It is great to have different connections, a support network, to have family, friends, to read different books that can help you with it. But also when we go to therapy and we sit with someone one-to-one, and we have different specific techniques and models that can help you to navigate imposter syndrome in a really safe and compassionate way. So one of the first tools that we use, and these tools are different. What I mean is, like, each therapist uses different tools. The tools that I'm talking are the tools that I normally use the most when I'm working. That does not mean that are the only tools or are the best tools. That means that each client comes and we have to adapt to the needs of each client. And also sometimes, even though we might have the best tools to work with the client might feel that we're not the right fit, and that's also okay. But what I will be talking here and sharing with you is what I've seen in my office at work and the tool that I normally use when dealing with it and working in a therapeutic journey together. So the first one is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And what we try to identify here is the thoughts that are coming and this inner dialogue. What's the dialogue and where the dialogue is coming from, and how to challenge the dialogue. Because sometimes we're just thinking without paying attention to it. We try to do it with a curious mind, not with judgment. It's more like, oh, I'm having this thought about, I want to be better. I want to excel more. Because if I don't do that, I'm not a good person. Well, we take a moment to think about where that thought is coming from and how it's having an impact on you. And just to be curious to explore it and to see in a different perspective and to say, how can we challenge it? What would happen if we challenge it? So that's one way to approach it, and also to identify the core of beliefs. And I enjoy exploring where this core of belief is coming from. Is it like what happens with your family? Like what was happening in this belief, how this belief kept your family together, or what's the purpose of this belief in your family and in your generations. We're trying to see that, and also to identify how is this belief is affecting your behavior and how therefore your behavior is affecting how you feel. And also another tool that can help us is a psychodynamic approach, trying to identify your childhood experiences. Yes, going back to the past, not to stay there, but to understand what probably is happening or how these mechanisms of defense were rooted in childhood. And even though now as an adult, the imposter syndrome, saying that the imposter syndrome symptoms somehow had a purpose during your childhood. So going back to the past will allow you to understand things from different perspectives, and important to know that that does not define who you are now, that we can always create new channels and we can always create new ways and new inner dialogue so you can move forward. And then a somatic tool, paying attention not only to the thoughts and to the emotions, but also to the body. Because probably whenever you feel imposter syndrome, that's a question I normally ask my clients. So tell me how your body feels when you're experiencing imposter syndrome. How does it feel? What's the body experience? And it's beautiful. Sometimes it's really difficult to name it, but what I'm saying is beautiful is that when we start paying attention, we can identify, oh yes, I feel I started to get tense here in probably my back or my shoulders. Like in my case, when I experience that, the feeling goes to my stomach. It's just like a feeling there is a tension there in between. So just being aware and be aware of where my mind is, but also my emotions and my body to identify that as well. That's also important and part of the process to name it. Mindfulness is another tool that can also help you, because what we do there is we being present. Imposter syndrome, we're also thinking, oh, I need to achieve the things, otherwise I'm going to be rejected. I'm thinking in the future, that's probably causing anxiety. Or I get stuck in the past, probably feeling depressed. When we bring attention to the present time, to the here and now, and we learn just to observe the thoughts, to accept the feelings, yes, they're overwhelming, but also just to observe them, both the feelings and the thoughts, like you're watching a river and it just comes and goes. So that's a great tool as well that I like to use in my practice. Mindfulness, it comes also self-compassion. And compassion is we can build that compassion, that need or that goal to somehow deal with suffering. So we can learn to calm down that self-critic in a gentle and a kind way. So it's important to create and to build this compassionate dialogue as well. So then we can create a strategy with the client where we set realistic goals, but just not only working on the goals, we are already trying to work in the other areas as well. The rational mind, where the thoughts are coming, the emotions, what I feel, the body, what I also like the body sensations, to identify them, to name it, to be able to sit with it, to be a detective and go back to the past and understand the data we have from there, so we can understand how that is affecting us in the present time, but knowing that we can redefine how we want to continue going forward. So all these different tools, like I said again, that are not the only ones, but are the ones that I normally like to enjoy and to do more at work when I'm working with imposter syndrome, can help you, can help us, can help all together to deal with it. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope that any of these material is useful for you. If you feel at any point that you're experiencing imposter syndrome, you feel curious about it, you would like to work about it, feel free to contact me, to reach out. I will be happy to working together. You can find my information. Also, there is my Instagram account, Lucia Therapy, where I post more information about this. And you can always find something useful and something valuable for you. Also, like I said before, don't forget to visit my blog, other blogs or podcasts, where I also talk about imposter syndrome with more detail. Enjoy the rest of the day or the night, and see you next time.
Flowers in Winter is a podcast by Lucia Gallegos, music by Rosy Cervantes. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Facebook as Lucia Therapy.